Hello, and welcome to the second part of our Debate 101 series for our coach workshops. So this Debate 101 is for people and coaches specifically without much debate background or without policy debate background. So in this talk, we'll be talking about policy debate. What is policy debate? What does a debate round itself look like? What are some of the key terms you're going to need to get started? So again, thank you so much for joining us on this debate journey. I really do believe that debate is a journey, and that while some of us are further along in the journey, that our job should be to help those who are interested learn more about this activity that we really love. It's been one of the most impactful things I have ever done in my life, and I'm so excited that you are going to help us bring debate to more students and to really help this activity. This is an introduction to policy debate. So this picture right here is from an in-person tournament where our students, you see they are reading evidence, one is speaking, and the rest of them are taking notes. We're going to get more into that later, but one important thing to know about policy debate is you are only speaking for 25% of the time, but listening for 75%. This means that as much as debate is a speaking activity, it is a listening activity. And later on, we're going to talk about some of the importance of that note-taking and why that's so critical to this experience and this activity, but why it's such an important skill for your students and for everyone when you're judging, when you're debating, when you're watching, all of those things. It's one of the most useful skills I've ever learned and has impacted me so much throughout my years since starting debate. So how is the debate topic selected? What is a debate topic? So debate topic is selected nationally each year. So everyone from Alaska to Florida to California to teams in Maine are all debating the same exact debate topic. So both our middle school and high school leagues will be debating the same topic, and it's chosen for the whole year. So policy debate has one topic all year long. And we'll dive into why that's not boring and why that's good. You become subject matter experts, but there's so many cases within that topic that it doesn't get boring, but it allows you to really learn so much about the topic. I remember as a high schooler that one year we had a transportation infrastructure topic, and going down the road with my dad, I would often just give him fun facts about the road and the funding and all the transportation. And he was a little concerned how at 16, I knew so much about the formulas for federal funding of roadways, but I explained that it was because it was a debate topic, and I was really excited to learn about all of it. And he thought I was slightly crazy, but that's okay. I learned so much about all the topics I've ever debated, and it's been incredible to both have the depth and breadth of different topics. And so these topics will alternate between domestic and international issues. So you might be debating military policy of the United States, but military policy in the Middle East, as was my first topic, or this year we're talking about criminal justice reform in the United States. So these alternate to give students a depth of and breadth of information and different knowledge bases they can pull from. So what does the topic look like? So we'll start with this topic of this year, which is resolve the United States federal government should enact substantial criminal justice reform in the United States in one or more of the following: forensic science, policing, and sentencing. So what you'll see here is all debate topics are going to start with result, which just means you should do something, and then it will go the United States federal government. So this is about broad United States policy. And then it says it should do something. So then comes the kind of big topic, which is criminal justice reform. And so you see within this, there's three different areas. So you see that we're not just debating policing all year. We're not just debating forensic science or sentencing. We're debating all of these. And this topic encompasses a lot of different areas. So even in policing alone, we have three different cases that our high schoolers and two of the middle schoolers will read, covering policing. So you'll see that this is a topic that really gives you a lot of different options. So we have this year, we have body cameras for police, predictive policing, which is a technology used by police departments. And for our high school students, they also debate enough about transferring funding from police into putting into community services. So defund the police. And so you'll see that within the large topic, Our students will learn about criminal justice reform, but they'll also learn about very specific policies. An introduction to policy debate. So we talked about last Debate 101 that a debate round is two teams of two debaters from two different schools, along with a neutral judge. The affirmative team argues for a policy, and a negative team argues against a policy. The judge will determine the winner on the ballot, hopefully not tell the debaters who won, just give feedback, and then rank the speakers and give them speaker points, as we also talked about, so we can give individual awards to the debaters. Now, the role of the affirmative team is that you control the federal government. You act as a logical policymaker. You say the United States federal government should do something. So this year, one of the cases is the United States federal government should enact a mandatory body cameras policy for all police in the United States. And so when you produce the plan, or like a house, right? You have the plan in the center, which is the policy proposal, like enacting body camera legislation. And you have the harms, it's one wall holding up the case, and solvency. So you have what you, the harms, the bad things that are happening. In case of the body cameras, that's related to police brutality. And you have a solvency. How does the plan solve for that? How does it, prevent these harms from happening and actually function as a policy? A lot of the feasibility questions are asked here. And this holds up the AF case. So we call each affirmative with each plan a case. That includes the different advantage areas, the solvency, all of that. We'll talk more about the specificity of the affirmative case and everything it entails and how to argue that more in the next Debate 101, which will be about the affirmative and how to argue on case positions. But this is an introduction to a policy debate as a whole. So we're not going to dive quite as deep into that quite yet. Now, the negative's goal is try to break down the affirmative case. They want the affirmative case to fall. So what they do is they defend the status quo or an alternative policy whenever we get into counterplans and other more in-depth topics. But for right now, they're just going to defend the status quo. Tune in for the counterplans lecture for how to defend something other than the status quo and why that's fun. And so you argue against this change. You do on-case attacks, which are attacks on the case itself. Again, we'll get to disadvantages in another coach workshop, also hosted by me, where the argument is you create this external worse problem, which is what a disadvantage is. It's a key negative position to argue that, no, you do this other unintended consequence that is really bad. And so that's what a disadvantage is. But right now we'll talk about on-case, as will the next lecture. And so the on-case problem is that the harms, it's exaggerated. It's not that bad. You think, all of these things are absolutely terrible. It's fine. Like, we have bigger things to worry about. And the solvency question is, you can't solve this problem. Yeah, that's a problem. And it's cool, but you can't do anything about it. Doing the plan would not fix it. There's no reason to do the plan if the problems you presented don't actually get solved by doing the plan. Then why would we do it? And so for both the affirmative and the negative, to present the plan and to break down the plan, there are two types of speeches in policy debate. The first is the constructive, which is the first half of the round. Each debater gives a constructive, and each debater gives a rebuttal. Total of 8 speeches. There's also cross-sects, which we'll get to in a second. But the constructives are first half, first 4 speeches. The arguments are introduced. They are constructing their arguments in this phase. There's a lot of reading. A lot of evidence is produced. And between constructives, and only constructives, are cross-examination periods, where the debater who just read is asked questions by the other team about what they read, maybe the other team setting up arguments that they want to read, or anything like that. The constructives are longer speeches. They're very important, but they're often more pre-scripted, and you kind of know what you're going to say, And like the very first speech, there's no reason not to have it totally prescripted because you don't have to respond to anyone yet. And so throughout the debate, the speeches get less scripted and more on the fly. But the constructives are mostly pretty prescripted. The rebuttals are the second half of the round. This is where the debate really gets fun. You've laid out all your arguments, you've presented all your evidence, but now you got to hash it out. You got to figure out who has the better arguments. You got to dive really deep into those arguments and do weighing and talk about why your impacts are the most in the round. Why should the judge vote for you? They are summarized, they are compared. We're doing a lot of evidence comparison and argument comparison and talk about the warrants or reason of our evidence and reasons you should prefer our team and our arguments, and why, if you were a policymaker choosing for the federal government, why you would side with us. There shouldn't be any major new arguments in the rebuttals, especially not the last two rebuttals. There simply aren't enough time for the other team to respond. Or in the case of the very last speech, you can't bring up a new argument because the other team can't respond at all. And then there's no cross-examinations between those. This is the speech order. Don't worry about memorizing it. We'll have copies in the judge's packet. We'll have copies in the school packets. We'll have resources online. We'll have it all sorts of places. So don't worry. But we have, you'll see first the affirmative speaks, and then the cross-examination, the negative speaks, the cross-examination, affirmative, cross-examination, negative, cross-examination, and the rebuttal switch order. The negative goes first, then the affirmative, the negative, and then affirmative. We'll get more in depth into how this speech order works and what happens in each speech, but there are a few key things to realize here. First is that the affirmative first presents their plan. So the entire debate centers around what that first affirmative constructive says. In middle school, constructives are 5 minutes. In high school, they are 8 minutes. And then after that, the negative gets to cross-examine or ask questions about what was just read. In middle school, that's 1.5 minutes. In high school, that's 3 minutes. The negative will speak, the affirmative, and the negative speaks twice in a row. Now, this is called the negative block. We'll get more into this too when we start talking about debating on case and more about policy debate. And in a few slides, we'll talk about each speech and their role. But you'll see that the back-to-back speeches are really important here because that's called the negative block, which we'll get to more in a moment. So that's not an error. They do have 2 speeches in a row. And you'll see that the affirmative has the first and last speech, and so that's their advantage. And the negative block, which is 13 minutes in high school debate and 8.5 minutes in middle school debate, is the big advantage of being negative. You get to really flesh out your arguments, put more arguments out there, and really explain and hammer home the logic and the warrants and the reasoning behind your arguments and really build them up. So now cross-examination is after each constructive, as we talked about. And there's 3 main reasons for this cross-examination. The first is clarification. If you missed anything, if you didn't understand something, if there was a word or concept you've never heard before, this is when you ask. Second is testing knowledge. Asking for specific questions about things, trying to catch your opponent off guard and make them seem like they know less about what they're talking about. And the third is to contest evidence and arguments. Be like, okay, so we've seen this before. Why does that not cause your impact that you talked about? And so that's the point of this cross-examination period. I think it's the most fun part of debate to watch as a judge, and as a coach, it's really fun. There's a lot of really great strategies. This will really help determine the speaker points or speaker ratings of your students. And so a question that is often asked is tag team cross-ex allowed? So let's talk about what that is. So tag team cross-ex means that all 4 debaters can be involved in the questioning and answering. Otherwise, it's just the debater who spoke on the side who spoke, and the one asking the question is a little complicated, but it's the debater who's not about to speak. So we'll get to that in a second, how the order works. It's a little confusing. I Still get confused to this day. In high school, that is allowed, but we don't encourage it. We really want the debater who's supposed to be asking and the debater who's supposed to be answering, doing the work. Otherwise, you sometimes run into situations where one partner tries to kind of take over the whole debate and run over their partner, and that's not fun. Everyone learns less. It's just less enjoyable for everyone. In middle school, it's not allowed because we feel this happening in middle school more. And so we want to encourage really only the debaters who are supposed to be speaking in that cross-ex to be speaking. Prep time. Prep time is a bank that students can use before any speech or cross-examination. It's like timeouts in football. It's not like basketball. It's like football timeouts. So you can't call it in the middle of a speech. Much like in football, you can't call a timeout in the middle of a play. You have to wait until this right before the speech or right before cross-examination in order to call prep time. Prep time does not have to be used in whole like minute increments. You can take 58 seconds of prep time or a minute and 37 seconds, like whatever you want. But you have a bank that you can use of time, and you can only take it in between speeches. It's time to gather your thoughts, write out your speech, write out arguments, organize, talk to your partner, look at files, figure out what you're going to say, figure out strategy, do all of that. Take a moment, just collect yourself. That's what prep time is supposed to be used for. The exciting part of policy debate, evidence. So this is an example from our core files, which we'll get to in a second. And so you'll see several things here. The first is that first part, strong U.S. hegemony prevents global war. So that's called the tag, or it's the headline of the argument that's being made. The second thing you see is the cite. That's just the author last name and the year is written. That's what's read out loud. But then below it, you'll see a full citation. So you'll see Salman Khalilzad, who is the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, and the United Nations during George W. Bush's presidency, and he's also been high-ranking official at the Department of Defense. And then this was written specifically, not just in 2011, but February 8th. You'll see the link. So if you want to read deeper into any of the articles in the core files, that's where you go. And then you'll see the tag of who cut it, which is VY, which is me. This is my evidence. And you'll notice in the card that it's and we call this a card, that you'll see that some words are bigger and bolded and underlined. So if there's no highlighting, like those are the words that are said. Those are the more important words that we've picked out that would be read. And then you'll see in this specific evidence that there's highlighting. So a student would just read the highlighting. The bold and underlined parts they're large. There's a lot of them, as you'll notice, which is on purpose. I did that on purpose because we want students to be able to highlight the most important parts to read. That way we know they are reading and understanding the evidence. It also means they're able to read more evidence in a speech, and they also understand the evidence that they're reading. And you'll see that we follow the argument model in policy debate of claim, warrant, impact. So you'll see the claim is strong U.S. hegemony prevents global war. The warrant is about new international order emerging, and that American retrenchment could have devastating consequences. Regional powers could disarm to balance against emerging threat. And now the impact, why do we care about all of this? Is there would be a heightened possibility for arms race, miscalculation, and other crises, spiraling in all-out conflict. Okay. And so that's the claim, warrant, impact model that evidence has. That's what makes it evidence, is that claim, warrant, and impact. And so what this would sound like in a debate round, first read the tag, strong U.S. hegemony prevents global war. Now I read the short cite of Khalilzad in 2011. Then I would just read the highlighted parts here, which is if U.S. policymakers fail to act and other powers continue to grow, a new international order will emerge. Then I skip down to the highlighting. Again, American retrenchment could have devastating consequences. Regional powers could rearm to balance against emerging threats. There would be a heightened possibility for arms race, miscalculation, or other crises spiraling in all-out conflict. So that's kind of what the evidence would look like. So when you're a judge, that's all you hear, or if you're coaching and watching around. But that's what's happening behind the scene, and that's what the students are looking at. But in cross-examination, we encourage the students to be looking at the ununderlined, the small parts, right? And so maybe they ask about, the other countries such as China, India, Brazil that's mentioned here. They're so like, what happens with them and all of that. So they'll be reading other parts of this evidence. And now, as I prefaced before, one of the most important skills of all policy debate, of all debate really in general, one of the most important life skills, honestly, which is called flowing, which is the specialized note-taking of debaters. At Chicago Debates, we were interviewing various people, multiple candidates actually for a role, and I was taking notes for the candidates just like a flow, and our executive director just looked at it and laughed and was like, okay, I see that you were flowing this. And I was like, yes, it's a skill that I learned at 14 that has not left me yet. And I still use it in various occasions, even if it's part of my role at Chicago Debates and interviewing candidates for a full-time job, that I'm still using those flowing skills. It was also immensely important for me when I was in college and taking notes in class, that this shorthand and this way of abbreviating things and taking notes and being used to writing as people are speaking while also listening, and that dual function, which is so important to me anytime in college, and debaters really have that edge. So let's talk some about flowing. We'll have more videos that talk more in depth of flowing. There's a lot of tricks and tips. That's a skill that you definitely improve at. People can be involved in debate for a decade and still be getting better at flowing. It's a great skill to have, but it's also an even better skill to continue to improve. So hopefully, while your students are debating, they should be flowing. And one way to get better at debating, debating is to flow better and have a better record of the arguments. But a good way to get better at flowing is watch debates and to flow and take notes, because that will help you when you're in your debate round. Because if you don't know what your opponent just said, you don't know how to answer it. You can't remember everything that was said in 90 minutes or 60 minutes. That's absurd. But if you have a note-taking device that helps you, then you can. And you can respond to arguments, and you can remember what your partner said. That way you can cover it in your own speech. So let's talk about some of the key parts of this flow. If anyone's wondering, this is the flow from the economy function part of our demo debate that we did using middle school times that the Chicago Debate staff did on the cash bail affirmative for the criminal justice topic. So if you're wondering what a master flow looks like for that debate, this is one. So up at the corner, either corner, but at the top of the page somewhere, you should write what the flow is called, what the argument is called. So each advantage or disadvantage, read by the negative, gets its own piece of paper, each contention, each observation. All of those words mean it's its own piece of paper. So otherwise, again, I don't know how you're going to fit what everyone says in 90 minutes on a single piece of paper. That's not feasible. So a way that we organize this is each piece of paper is a major argument. In this case, it's the economy advantage from the cash bail affirmative. And what you'll see is that I break it up between the speeches. You'll notice there's one column for the neg block, one in for the 2 in C/1 in R. That's okay. I like doing it that way. That's a very common way to do it, but if you want to split it up, you can. And you'll see that I also do two color flowing, which is a more advanced technique where I think is super helpful, where you flow the affirmative arguments in one color and the negative arguments in the other. I still struggled with this as a debater until for some reason I realized that if I flowed the affirmative in green and the negative in purple, for some reason that worked for my brain. Since then, I've become better at two color flowing, and I can flow them in any color. So I chose green for the affirmative as in go, and red for the negative as in stop, to kind of keep things easy to remember. So you'll see that I have like the tag written. So on a flow, you want to write the tag. You don't have to write every word of the tag, and definitely not every word the debaters are saying. Again, as we saw in the piece of evidence, there was a lot of words said, but the only things that mattered was that a strong U.S. hegemony prevents war, and kills at an 11. The specific arguments made on the card weren't as important as me remembering that argument that they made. And then it can help me remember, and then I can think more about the reasons of that. about rearmament and emerging powers and things like that. That doesn't need to all go in my flow. So you'll see that I use symbols, like as a lot of dollar signs mean cost. And you'll see that I also have the author name here in the year. Looking at the first one in C column, you see that I have F, the affirmative, X means doesn't, S means solved, exclamation point means impact. So that means the affirmative doesn't solve or impacts. Because two reasons. First is it's too small, doesn't affect enough. And the second is alternative causes. Now, there is no way, if you've not seen a lot of debate flows, that you would have gotten all of that out of that. But I understand what it means. And hopefully my debate partner would understand what it means. There's no way debate flows ever look this good, because my handwriting would not be this good if I was in a debate round. My high school debate partner has excellent handwriting. Her flows were always beautiful. Mine would not, called illegible at times. But this is an example. What matters is that you can read your flow. Also, if your partner could too, but again, that's just nice to have. But in more flowing videos and techniques, we'll get more into what a lot of symbols you can use and systems. But what matters here is not that. What matters here is that you have notes and a record of the debate, and that you know what your opponent said so you can respond. That's it. That's all that matters. As long as you can read your flow, it helps you figure out your debate, what's happened. That's all that matters. Nothing else. So yeah, you'll have a slide later to look at it. And if you want to compare, if you have your students watch the debate, that's fine too. Yeah, that's flowing. It's super helpful. It's a really, really great skill to have. Core files. So the core files, we talked some about, I mentioned them, I believe. So they're produced by Chicago Debates staff and different debate experts. Last year, I helped a lot with the core files. It was an absolutely wonderful time. I enjoyed it so much. It gives a starting point for research. At middle school, we allow updated evidence. So that is more updated evidence on the arguments that exist in it. And high school debate, we, in some of our conferences, some of our divisions, especially varsity divisions, allow students to debate anything under the topic. But this gives a starting point. This gives an idea of what you can read, and it gives different options for the negative to read against anything. So it has both affirmative cases and negative arguments. It has enough to sustain an entire year of debate in and of itself. You don't need anything else. They're massive, they're hundreds of pages long, but they have explainers to explain what's happening. They're well organized, all of that. So yes, they're super intimidating. Trust me, as a person who produced the cards for a lot of that, it was a lot of work, but they're very well organized, very well done. That gives, again, everything you need. Every piece of evidence you would need for a debate, debate all year are going to be in these core files, rather the core files. You can add to them, but they are the core. And they have a focus on balance and education. So we're not just trying to pick the best possible debate argument so the affirmative wins every time, right? Our thought is not what is the best, most winning affirmative case possible. It's what's the most debatable. What can we have balanced, good, well-researched, well-qualified authors to say? What should our students be asking? And the educational component of what should our students be debating? What do we want them to learn about? So criminal justice reform, that was such an important question. We wanted our students to learn about cash bail. We wanted them to learn about body cameras. We wanted them to learn about the balance between state and federal government, and about balanced budget amendments of states, and how adding more money somewhere means cuts other places, and what does that look like for state policy? We wanted those questions being asked. We wanted our students reading about that and learning about that, reading highly qualified experts, professors, and legal experts out of law reviews and peer-reviewed journals and well-qualified, news sources. That's what we wanted. And so that's what these core files are. Trust me, we have thought way too much about them and everything, and there has been way overthought. But we provide these to everyone, so that way everyone has that same starting point. Everyone has the same evidence base. Everyone has an equal chance starting at the beginning of the year. And they're built as a ladder. We start with one case, and then we build upon that. Right? We start with the simplest disadvantage, and then we build through your debate knowledge throughout the year. So it's created in a way that we all start at the same point. All novices, all rookies start on a case. And then it's built to be increasingly difficult, right? We don't start with the most difficult case. We start with the simplest, and then we add to that. And as you work your way through the core files throughout the year, you learn so much more about debate, but also about policy and about the topic. And you do so much of this critical research. And because there's so many different arguments to pull from, and it's a huge bank of knowledge and wealth of information, that it allows those critical thinking skills and that comparison of evidence and arguments. So that's what the core files are. It's all of that. So it's one set for the whole year. We make sure it doesn't get boring. We make sure there's multiple different strategies, again, that ladder and build upon each other. So you can have really in-depth and fun debates while learning a lot and learning about things that are really valuable to learn about, no matter what the topic is. We're lucky this year with criminal justice reform that so much of it's so relevant and we're just so lucky to learn. But each year we really sit down and we think, what do we want our students to learn? What produces the best and most fair debates so they get those critical thinking skills that we really want them to get out of policy debate. That's why we do that. This is for the education, for those skills. And so that's what we really build into our core files. Next thing, a common question of policy debate. First-time judges, first-time debaters, first-time coaches is, why does everything end in nuclear war? Well, not everything, but most things do. So let's talk about impacts for a second. I, as someone who wrote the core files and chose to end everything in nuclear war, not only is it the way that policy debate kind of functions, but just because something does function that way doesn't mean we shouldn't ask why. So the reason is that everyone needs offense and defense, and a huge impact for the judge to vote on because you want to prevent nuclear war is so important. But we have links to that, right? We have argument chains on how something leads to that, right? It doesn't just lead to nuclear war, right? It leads to economic inequality, and that leads to instability, which leads to nuclear war, according to well-qualified professors and people who research for a living. You know, we quote those articles like you saw with Khalilzad and Levin. And then the judge decides which world they want to live in. But the question is, why does it need to go that far? Well, the answer is, with policies, kind of does. That is real world. I know at first glance that might not sound super real world and educational. The more you think about it, the more you realize that in the real world, for people to care, for policies to be made, things have to be pretty extreme. When Al Gore talked about global warming, we thought we were going to lose polar bears. No one cared. There wasn't any major policy. There was no Paris Climate Accord. There was no, big movements. And the reason? People didn't think it was big enough. It didn't have a big enough impact. All of a sudden, when we realized Miami and Manhattan could be underwater and the economy destroyed and bigger hurricanes, that's when people cared about global warming. We realized that it could indeed probably kill us all, or at least make the world a significantly worse place. Caused big droughts in California and, dust storms in Kansas and, India being too hot to live in. That's when people cared. That's when policies were being made. Or you think about the Cold War, almost leading to nuclear war and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what caused a shift in policies. Right? It was the risk of almost dying in a full-out nuclear war with US and Russia that finally changed things. That's what it took. No one cared about Ukraine going into Crimea until we realized that it could be a Russian takeover of land and lead to US-Russian war, which would probably kill us all, big nuclear arsenals. People don't really care about policies until they realize how it's going to impact them, how it's going to change the world and possibly lead to a place we can't or don't want to live in. Even in the world of COVID-19, no policies were done in America. No one cared when it was just a basic flu in China. And then we saw the possible death and destruction. Then policies were made. So maybe the policy debate impacts of everything leading to nuclear war isn't really that absurd. It's really how policymakers have to function. It's how people have to care. And so that's what you do for the judge. So yes, it does sound hyperbolic. And yes, it sometimes is. It definitely is at least a bit hyperbolic. But at the end of the day, it's not that unrealistic. It's not that unreasonable. Because when we think about it, major policies really have to affect a lot of people in huge ways before anyone cares and before there's huge pushes for policies. And so that's a lot of the, it's kind of my, 2 cents on why I don't think these impacts are as ridiculous. It also allows great impact framing and talk about what we should care about and how things can lead to bigger impacts, which is something we should all understand. And that's an important part of critical thinking. And so that's why we encourage our students to do this. And even though it's, a normal policy debate, it's the reason that we've just let it happen and supported it, in fact, because we understand that making an impact big and making it something that people care about is important. And that's how you get real policy change, is by making it big, relevant, have a huge impact. No one wants to support a policy if they don't know how it's going to impact them. And that's what we do with the impact framing of policy debate. So now the speech by speech. So constructive speeches, as we said, involve heavily on reading and evidence, and they construct strategies. So 1AC reads the plan and the case, almost entirely scripted. The cross-examination, the to-win asked the question, because as we said before, the person who asked the question is the person not about to speak. Because during that cross-examination time, the one-in, their partner, is going to be preparing their speech, making sure the speech is ready, getting warmed up, all those things, right? So you don't want them asking questions because they're supposed to be thinking about their speech. And then after the 1NC happens, also almost entirely scripted. Again, with the core files, you know what they're going to say, like the one scripted. And the one asks the questions because the 2A is getting their speech ready. And so the 2AC extends the arguments made in 1AC. You have to keep extending the debate rounds, throughout the debate round, remind the judge what your case is and what you said, and explain how the affirmative happens, its terms and its solvency and all of those things. And it refutes the 1NC. So most of this is still scripted and a lot of evidence, but a lot of it starts becoming summary and analysis. And then cross-examination, the 1N asks, because again, the 2N is waiting for the 2NC. So they're working on this speech right now. So this is the first part of the negative block. So in the negative block, this is a huge negative advantage in the debate round. It counters the fact that the affirmative has the first and last speech. And so in the negative block, the negative will split up the different arguments made. Maybe the 2N will take the case, and the 1NR will take the dissent of something. They'll take up different flows, those pieces of paper, those major arguments. They'll split those up between them. And so they extend some of the points in the 1NC and respond to the 2AC. Again, they'll be reading a lot of evidence, and some summary will start to happen here. And they'll do explanation of their case and explanation of their arguments that they read in the 1NC. And then there's, again, break, over the 2A ask the questions. And then the rebuttals start, which is to expand upon previous arguments made and really include your persuasion here. Persuasion is the most important part of the rebuttals. And so the 1NR extends other points that the 1NC made. They should not be overlapping, and respond to points that the 2AC made on those specific pieces of paper, or those flows or those arguments. There's still maybe some card reading, but this should be towards the end of card reading. The 1AR strategically answers. It's a short speech. In high school debate, you have 5 minutes to answer 13 minutes of arguments. In middle school debate, you have 3.5 minutes to answer 8.5 minutes of arguments. That's a lot. You gotta pick and choose. You gotta be efficient. The 1AR is not the most fleshed out speech. It's not the most analysis. It's just trying to answer everything that the 2AC made and extend it and be really efficient. It's really hard speech, speaking as a form of 1A. It's a hard speech. And you strategically answer them all. And so it's not much reading. You should not be reading more than 1 or 2 pieces of evidence, even at the high level. At the lower levels, you should not be reading any evidence in the 1AR. So rebuttal, start rebooting your arguments. Okay, yeah. And then there's the last negative speech. So the 2NR, also as someone who's a former 2A. Wonderful speech. It's really negative, extends, really focusing on their strongest argument, tells you why this is the argument you need to vote for as a judge. It responds to the 1AR arguments and ask really, why do you vote negative? There should be no evidence reading. Do not read evidence. Tell your students to never read evidence in the 2NR. No. And then after the negative, it's the very last speech. They're done. And so now it's a 2AR, which is where you extend the strongest affirmative arguments. And you also defend whatever the 2NR said, why they should win. You say, nah, this is why we should win. And really focuses on why should you vote affirmative. Never, ever, 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 even in college debate, ever read evidence in the 2AR. No, don't do it. No. They can't respond to it. If you messing up an argument that badly, you're probably just going to lose. And reading new evidence in the 2AR is just going to make you lose more, because the judge is going to be like, why did you do that? That was terrible. That wasn't nice. So don't read evidence. This should be all analytics. It should be all, discussions that the affirmative has come up with, written out themselves, should be specific to the round, all of that. And so I know I mentioned that I was both the 1A and 2N. So what normally happens is that so each debater on a team, one will be the second negative and one will be the second affirmative. And those people are kind of in charge of those cases, right? So I was almost always the second negative. So I was in charge of the negative positions. I always thought about the negative. What should we do when we're negative? And then I was the 1A. So whenever we were affirmative, I was the 1A. And so then my partner thought everything about the affirmative side. And so that kind of splits up the responsibility, make sure everyone's giving those last speeches, which is where you really learn a lot. You do a lot of comparison and why do you vote for us, and persuasion. They're very persuasive speeches. So we like students to be able to give one of those. And so splitting it up with the 2N and 2A is a way of doing that. And it also balances out the responsibility, and it really helps balance out the round, right? Because the 1AC is mostly scripted, and so is the 1NC. And so it kind of balances out that you each get one, more scripted argument, and so on. And so that's why it's split up like that. That's a kind of a time mold tradition, but it's one that we fully support, and I think is really helpful for students learning. And students not learning. College debaters at the very high level also do this. It's a very good system. It works. Just keep doing it. Sometimes if one debater has way more experience, you'll make them like double twos, but not likely. A student should be, a 1 and a 2. That's how that works. Now, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that was so much information. I'm never going to learn all this. Dear God, I know nothing about debate. And you go on YouTube and you see some college debaters spreading at hundreds of words a minute. And you're like, I'm not going to get there. Nope, I'm done. That's not the case, right? In the same way that if you've never seen a football game before and you turn on the Chicago Bears game, think, wow, I could never do that. I could never coach that. Whew. I don't know what a zone offense is. I don't even know defense. I don't know what this thing is a field goal. I don't know, right? And it's like that. Debate is a game. It's like football. And so the same way that you get better at understanding football is the same way you get better at understanding debate. You can't just read about it. You can't just listen to me speak and talk about it for hours as much as, I would enjoy that. I think a lot about debate, but the best way to do it is not just read articles. It's to watch it. It's to do it. Get involved in debate rounds and practice. Do it. It's once you do it, it's easier to learn about it. And watch more debates. If you're a tournament, if you're not judging, go watch debates. Watch your students. Watch a varsity round. Learn more about debate. You watch debate. You analyze debates. You do debates. You read about debate. You talk about debate. You have, other coaches. You talk about it. Talk about it with your students. After watching a debate at a tournament, go talk to them about it. What was good? What was bad? Things like that. Maybe you watch a demo debate that Chicago Debates has produced, and after the debate, talk about it. Analyze it. What did we do well? What did we do that wasn't great? If you were a judge, how would you have voted? Think about that. Get in the judge's shoes. And that's how you understand debate, right? No one understood football over, one game, right? No one understood football by someone being X's and O's, X's and O's, here's how it works, right? Even if you're listening to Nick Saban, he couldn't do that in a day. In the same way that you could listen to all of these coach workshops back to back to back, and you wouldn't get it. That's not how you learn debate. These are helpful. These will help you start understanding those strategies. But now you need to watch debates and get more involved. You can watch the part 3 of Debate 101, but it's about learning about it and watching it and participating in it, reading core files, right? You don't know what an affirmative really is until you read multiple affirmatives. Like, that's how I learned a lot of different debate arguments when I was a debater. I remember that the way that I learned, disadvantages was through reading disadvantages. The way that I understood critiques was reading through critique files, right? Watching debate rounds. Like, that's what taught me. That's what helped me. And I had coaches to go to ask these questions to, and lectures online, and that's what helped me. So you're not going to learn about debate in a day. You're not going to know everything there is. I'm sorry. But it's a reiterative process. In the same way that Alabama plays a very different style of football and very different football game than middle school. Like, just because you see some super in-depth, debate round online doesn't mean that's what you have to be able to coach. Your students are probably just as near at this as you are. So long as you can be one step ahead, and by being an educator and being an adult who has some background on world issues, you will be, right? And something that I've learned as a judge and as a coach, I have coach teams and judge teams that are better than me. And I still have something to offer. I still have a third-party experience that can tell them whether or not that's a good play. When you're watching an Alabama football game, you know whether or not something was a good play or not often, even though you never were, good enough to play at Alabama, right? That's what this is about. But having that, bird's eye view and being able to find solutions and things to fix and to learn more about it. So that's my take on learning debate. Is it's something that I'm still doing. I've been in this activity over a decade, and I'm still learning things all the time. No one knows everything, but the goal is to learn a lot and to be able to help walk your students through that learning process. What's more important than being amazing at debate is learning debate. That process of learning and doing and knowing what you can and being interested in reading. Some of the best things I learned was when I was interested in learning about debate, not even doing it, but the things in the articles and the strategy and those critical thinking skills I gained along the way were more important than any win or loss ever was. So that concludes this part with a few more unscripted rants. So yeah, if you have any questions, this is recorded, so it's not like there's a Q&A section. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of the program officers, whoever your program officer for school support is. They will have the answers. We'll all have depths of debate knowledge or places to go when we don't have the answer. Great resources. And again, we're so excited that you're going to join this journey of debate, because we think it's something that's so worthwhile for you, your students. I know that I've gotten, I think, almost as much out of coaching than I ever did as a debater. It's been an incredible experience so far, and working with schools has been absolutely incredible. It's helped me learn and helped me grow. And that all of that is thanks to a willing coach who is willing to just help me along the debate journey. So again, thank you so much. And there will be more lectures like this and more talks on the basics of debate, as well as more advanced lectures and more advanced topics, the more that we learn and the more that we grow together.